I'm April Tribe Juke. Welcome to the Beacon of Light podcast. I believe we are all made with light, and light is hope. This podcast brings authors who write stories of hope to all of you. Your journey to be inspired and amplified by these stories starts now. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody to the Beacon of Light podcast. We are excited for you guys to be here this evening, and I am really excited to have as our guest Nicole Beverly, because I have been reading her book, and in that reading, studying through the challenges that she went through, I know that this is going to be a topic of really great discussion. So in something that I wanted to address right in front, when I put it in on the LinkedIn, I had somebody pop up immediately and say, I am saving this for tonight. And I had responded to say, many people who've escaped abusive situations have interesting and deep stories. And the response back was, I need to know more. And so that's exciting to see that people are really interested to know what happens when we finally get out and we're feeling like, okay, they're locked away, we could possibly be safe now. But Nicole's story is going to share a perspective tonight that I think is going to be a challenge for some. It could be triggering for some. So this is kind of that pre-warning when we go into a topic that has to do with domestic violence. So I want everybody to know that that's kind of the things that are going to be going on. All right. So before we go any further, again, my name is April Tribe Juke. I'm broadcasting down here in Kyle, Texas. And Nicole, where are you broadcasting from this evening?
I am broadcasting from Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Excellent. I did get that spelling in there.
I like that Ypsilanti sign. That was awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome thing. It looks like we've got a few Facebook users here showing themselves up. Go ahead and click on that link for your StreamYard so that we can see your name. But thank you so much for popping in and being here this evening. Okay, Nicole. So hold up your book loud and proud.
Sure.
What is this book title called?
So the title of my book is Finding Nicole. And, the reason I chose that title is once I left my abuser and my abusive relationship, I really had to completely find myself again and rediscover who I was, because being in an abusive relationship, I lost my identity.
Yes, that happens often, I think, because of how it is stripped down in our own lives, and that sense of worth is really emptied. The sense of even what do we like, what do we not like? We have probably conformed ourselves to so many things for our abuser's sake for our own life that when we're asked simple questions like, how do you like your eggs? You might be pausing to think, I honestly don't know anymore, right? And so that strip down is something really important that we have to build back. So Nicole, since you started with that kind of idea and concept, how did you start to build yourself back? What did you do?
Yeah, so it was a long process, and the process for me was complicated by the fact that once I left, my abuser was stalking me for the better part of 2.5 years. So while I was trying to, rebuild myself and find myself again, I was still dealing with having to call the police all of the time and looking over my shoulder everywhere I went and being afraid to sleep at night. So that process was much more difficult. And I always tell people when they hear about domestic violence situations and they make the comment of, oh, they just need to leave. They just need to leave. And I always say, if it was only that easy and that simple, people would leave. But it's not that simple when you leave. It's the most dangerous time. Your abuser realizes they lost power and control, and they're going to try to do anything they can to get you back. So it's never as simple as just leaving. And I wanted to throw in there too, because some people might see the cover of my book and oops, I'm sorry, everything's backwards, and be like, why would you pick that as the picture? Because it's kind of scary and it looks like a crime thriller maybe. And the purpose of that was so that abusers, if they were to find the book, or even if it was the ebook that they found, someone reading that they're in a relationship, but they would think that it was just a crime thriller, they wouldn't realize that it was actually a guide for victims of domestic violence and a story about someone escaping domestic violence.
That is very interesting and poignant that you put that out there, because I think many of us who've had these situations and have written down, the covers are in itself also part of the escape. Because I would say almost all of us who've written something, there is a hidden language, support, agenda, plan, something within the book to empower somebody else, that once they pick it up and read it, that they then too can make their escape. So thank you, Nicole, for being very aware of that, and even your book being part of the escape to help others escape is pretty phenomenal. So thank you, Nicole, for that. So let's talk about the abuse and what happened, because I think what shocks a lot of people is that there must have been signs, there must have been something beforehand that why would they just go and get married to somebody that was abusing them? Why would they do that? How do you answer that?
Yeah, so abusers are masters of manipulation and disguise. And when you first start dating them, they are going to show you their best side. You know, it's kind of like that mask of their Prince Charming or Princess Charming, and they're going to ask you tons of questions about yourself and only want to spend time with you and present like this amazing person and partner. And what they're doing is they're learning about you. And they're kind of reading out your strengths, your weaknesses. And then because I didn't know the red flags, I missed them all. So no one as a teenager, and I met my ex-husband in college, no one as a teenager taught me, this is what you need to look out for when you're dating. These are the signs: the jealousy, the rushed relationships, the intensity, the isolation. So I missed them all and thought, okay, the jealousy just means he loves me so much. The isolation just means he doesn't want me spending time with people who he feels are negative influences. So I didn't know the signs, so I didn't recognize the signs, and I saw them as he just loves me so, so much. And, you know, whenever abusers, you know, you're not going to start out in a relationship with someone being abusive to you, right? They're, like I said, going to put on this front, and you fall in love with this person. And when things happen, there's always apologies and there's promises to change, and you want to believe that person because you want to get back to how good it was in the beginning, because you know it's possible. And they're also incredibly skilled at making you believe that everything is your fault, that something you did caused the abuse or caused an argument, and gaslighting, which is like making you believe that events that occurred happened differently. And they're so skilled at using these strategies with victims. And I just want to clarify, some of the strongest, most intelligent, beautiful, amazing people that I know have been victims of domestic violence. So this can truly happen to anyone. And as you can probably tell from me now already, I'm very outspoken. I'm very not going to back down. And I would have told you in high school that this would never have happened to me. And yet, and still here I am today telling you guys that I woke up one day and I realized, like, wow, I am in not only an abusive relationship, but I'm in a relationship that I'm risking my life if I continue to stay in it.
That's very powerful impact to know that as it comes about, when we finally have that awakening to know this is it, it is that part of really, you have to make a decision. So how did you decide to escape? Was it just one day? Did you start making a plan? Share with us what happened with that.
Sure. Things were getting progressively worse in our house behind closed doors, of course, right? Because on the outside, on the surface, everything looked beautiful. Like we were this beautiful family. We had a nice house. We had nice cars. But behind closed doors, things were really beginning to escalate, not just with the verbal and emotional abuse, but with the physical abuse. And there was an incident in particular where my ex-husband was trying to knock down a bird's nest. My kids were very upset about the baby birds, and I tried to leave with my children. And he pulled me back inside, and there was an incident of severe abuse, and he held a gun to my head. and told me all of the reasons he was going to kill me, that he should kill me, everything that was wrong with me that would make him want to kill me. And that if anyone had heard me yelling for help, because I did try to run, but he was able to grab me by my hair and shirt and pull me back in. And he said if anyone had heard me yelling for help and called the police, once the police arrived, he planned on shooting them and me. So then I became terrified that the police were going to ring the doorbell. And it was a situation where I remember just sitting there thinking, I'm going to die, and trying to decide if I made a run for it, how far I could make it. But I knew he would shoot me in the back as I was running. I cannot explain why he didn't pull the trigger that night, but he did take my keys, which, abusers always do, so you can't escape. He took my phone. He unplugged the house phone to make sure I couldn't reach for help. And he made me sleep in the same room with him. And the next morning, the first thing he said to me was that I owed him an apology for almost making him kill me. And I knew that something had changed. There were no more apologies. There were no more promises to change. He was now getting off on this power and fear. And I was so afraid. I would use the word paralyzed with fear. I mean, I was still going to work every day and putting on this front like everything was fine, but I was terrified to tell anyone because he would tell me every single day, if you tell someone, I will hunt you down. I will kill your family. You will never see your kids again. And I knew and believed him that all of those things were true. So it took me 4 months of living with someone who was telling me every single day they were going to kill me and how they were going to kill me. And, he would say things like, with the internet, I can find you no matter how far you run, no matter how far you go. And in reality, unless someone changes their complete identity, social security number, that is very true. And I knew that. So what ultimately was the final straw for me is there was an incident when he was escalating. And I remember laying in bed and I was thinking, okay, how am I going to get to this gun before he does? And I realized, like, Nicole, you have to leave, because if you don't leave, he is going to kill you or you're going to kill him in self-defense. And either way, your kids are going to end up with no parents. So at that point, I reached out and I finally told my mom. And I had been at work on my work computer doing some research about safety planning and how to safely leave. So I started making copies of important documents when he wasn't home. I started packing away a few things in laundry baskets that he wouldn't notice and taking it to my mom's house. She opened up a bank account in her name with my name on it, so I could start putting a little bit of money into it. And about 3 weeks after I told her, I filed for a personal protection order. And as soon as it was approved by the judge, I went to my kid's school, went to my mom's, got the stuff that we needed, and then we headed to my sister's house in Canada, where we stayed for 2 weeks. I had to take 2 weeks off of work and tell them, what was happening and had been happening, because they had no idea. And that was why I was able to finally make the break to leave the relationship.
So then this is very heroic. You have a plan, you escape even to a different country. You have done, like, on the checklist, right? All of these things. So you would think you've got the protective order, check. You've escaped, check. The kids are with you, check, check, check. Why didn't things settle down after that? What happened next?
Yeah. So, I had to return to work. So I had to return from Canada. And, I think my ex-husband was expecting that if he came back with those promises to change and offers to go to counseling, that I would come back. And when I didn't, that's when the stalking behavior and the threats increased even more. And during that 2.5-year period, I called 911 13 times. It should have been probably 100 times, but I got so tired of calling and not getting help and not getting the response that I thought I would get from police that I didn't call that often. But there were times where it was so extreme, and I even had recordings of him saying he was going to slit my throat and he was going to be in my house and I wouldn't know, and he was going to kill me in the middle of the night. And I know this is dark and triggering, but I want people to know the reality of what victims face when they leave. And it was a situation for 2.5 years. I lived in fear. I had to go to work every day. I had to still take care of my kids every day, but this man was threatening to kill me. He was following me. He tried running me off the road while I'm on the phone with police, which is all in my book. But no one in the beginning was taking it seriously. And out of those 13 911 calls, he was only arrested 2 times. And he got probation. The first time on aggravated stalking, and it was pled down to stalking. And then the second aggravated stalking stuck, but they were going to release him on a COPS agreement. And that's when I made the decision, after talking to the victim advocate, about that I needed to make a victim impact statement to the judge and basically tell the judge that I was fearful for my life. And if they released him, that he would kill me. And so I did that. And in between the time I made my victim impact statement and sentencing is when my ex-husband made the first attempt to hire someone to kill me from jail. And that was while he was still housed in our local county jail. And the gentleman that came forward was another inmate. He passed a polygraph test. He was willing to testify, but he wanted a deal. And our prosecutor refused to make a deal with him, so there were no new charges. So my ex-husband was sentenced to 15 months in prison, because once you hit that year, you do, if it's more than a year, you do go to prison. And then he was approved for parole, which is pretty common in our state of Michigan, that at the minimum sentence date, you're approved for parole. And it was upon him being moved to the step-down unit that 2 more inmates came forward, stating that he was saying he was going to kill me as soon as he got out. They were going to see him on the news, or that he was trying to hire more individuals to kill me from prison. An investigation was done on that, no new charges. And then 2 inmates from the step-down facility reported to that corrections officer there that he had offered them money to kill me as well, because they were going to be released before him. And that case got a little further because they actually were going to make plans to put a wire on those gentlemen, but there was miscommunication between the prison and the step-down facility, and my ex-husband was moved back to the prison for a new parole hearing because of what had happened with the inmates coming forward before they could wire those individuals. And this is all in my book, including police reports, because people would hear my story and be like, there's no way this is true. This can't be possible. So I put, although I've changed names, I've put the actual police reports for every single incident in my book. So if anyone wanted to fact check, they can do that. And one of those investigations resulted in a paragraph-long report by a police officer who decided he didn't even interview the other inmates, but decided, based on my ex-husband's body language, that he was telling the truth and that he had not attempted to hire people to kill me from prison. And I know it sounds unbelievable. It sounds insane that a police officer would not take this more seriously when it had already happened multiple times. But in our state, there's no communication between state police posts and the prisons. So he didn't have that information when he wrote that report. He didn't have that information until I personally gave it to him, which is incredibly frustrating. So I will just jump ahead, April, if it's okay, to the last.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So because of that incident, the parole board at least did take it seriously enough not to release him. So that bought me more time, and I was able to then go for the next 2 years. Of course, when someone's in prison, you have to go to the parole board and essentially beg them to keep you safe and keep that person incarcerated, which I did. But as his max sentence date was coming closer and closer, I was getting, I had about 1.5 years away, and I was looking at relocating. I was looking at changing my identity when I got another call from a prison up in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, where my ex-husband was. And it was another state police detective that another inmate had come forward and reported that my ex-husband was offering him money to kill me because he was going to be released first. And at that point—
So wait a minute. Then we are up to seven people that have been hired or attempted to hire that he has at least had this discussion with to kill you. 7 people just in this little bit of an interview that we have.
Yeah.
So can you guys understand this out there? Can you understand that it's a life that has been threatened with documentation, with conversations of hiring hitmen to kill someone? What do you feel should happen next? And then what actually happens next is so different. So go ahead, Nicole, and share from this part.
Yeah, so I think when that detective called me, April, that he was probably expecting me to be like devastated and afraid. And instead, the response that he got from me was, thank God, like, finally, like, we have an opportunity, we have a new chance to get him on these new charges. Like, this inmate that was being housed with him, he didn't want a deal. He just wanted to do the right thing. He knew I had kids, and he didn't want anything to happen to us. And so I was so hopeful, and he was willing to wear a wire. So through basically, that was from November to April, series of people taking time off work and things happening. And I've got it all documented because I learned early on to document every single phone call, every single email, person's name, time, date, what happened, what was said, were there witnesses, because I had learned that people weren't listening to me and people weren't believing me. So I was so grateful that I had that documentation. It's all here, and you guys can see where I would go 2 weeks at a time, 3 weeks without hearing anything, knowing this person's trying to hire people to kill me. And ultimately the wire attempts failed. And the one wire recording that they had the most information on had too much background noise because there was a football game going on, and they couldn't pull the recording out of the offer exchange for money. And so this man was risking his life wearing a wire in prison to try to help me, but the technology wasn't good enough and it failed. And the prosecutor, despite all of the past attempts to hire, the Lewis County prosecutor refused to move forward with new charges because he, in his opinion, and by the way, April, he never would speak to me. I called him multiple times. He would only have his assistant talk to me. He would never, be honest and just tell me why. But from his assistant's point of view, he didn't believe that a jury would believe other inmates. So he refused to prosecute my ex-husband. So I had been waiting from November to April thinking we were going to get new charges 100%, like in my mind. And then it was like the rug was pulled from under me when I was told that they were going to do nothing yet again. And it was at that point that I was torn between, okay, I've got to, change my identity. We've got to move. I've got to relocate. I started looking at places, but then I was also like, you know what? This is ridiculous. This is not okay. Like, I should not have to be going through this. I started consulting with attorneys to sue the state of Michigan for failure to protect. And most of the high profile attorneys in our state turned me down because they didn't think there was enough money in my case for them. I finally found one attorney in Detroit who was willing to work with me. And at the same time, one of my friends, Angie Lopez, got me connected to a reporter at the Detroit Free Press, who, once I told her my story, and of course she was at first like, I need to see these police reports. I need this information, because anyone hearing the story is going to think there's no way this could happen this many times and no one would do anything. But once she investigated and did the work, she decided to tell my story. And she ran it front page, Detroit Free Press, on a Sunday. And it was like a 2-page spread about my story and the realities that not just myself, but other victims of domestic violence face. And we also found out that the only way to get over the head of that prosecutor up north was to go to the Attorney General. And so in that article, she asked for people to contact the Attorney General's office on my behalf to try to get them to take my case. And that's when we also went very heavily to social media. And my friends, my family, was sharing it, and the Attorney General's office was getting bombarded with calls and emails and Facebook posts with tags about our case, and that they had to do something and protect our family because this was all so absurd. And finally, you know, and luckily the Free Press was continuing to follow up, and then the news caught on to the story, and we were in a situation where it was an election year. And I know politics play a lot into how much help people get, because a lot of people might ask, April, why did I get this attention? Why did my case get the attention it did and theirs didn't? And to be honest with you, what worked in my favor, it was an election year, and our Attorney General happened to be running for governor of our state. And so the amount of pressure that was being put on, they finally agreed to meet with me. And I showed up with all my folders and notebooks and documentation, and, you know, went over everything with them and answered every last question that they had. And 2 days later, they called me and said that they were going to take my case. And
woo! Hang on, gotta celebrate for a second. Woohoo! Woohoo! Let's see if we can kick in here. Kick.
Right. Yes. And we have amazing prosecutors, but then that launched into a year of 3 separate trials in 3 counties. So what they were able to do is they were able, although he's never been charged with attempt to hire or murder for hire, he was able to be charged for witness intimidation and extortion. And so because some of it occurred where I was working, it was in Wayne County. Some of it occurred where I was living, which was Washtenaw County, and some occurred at the Jackson prison. It was Jackson County. So then I had a year ahead of me of constant court dates, back and forth. And that's when Chris Cuomo's staffers got word on my story and contacted me and asked if they could follow me through the process. And it was a very difficult decision because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is already so emotional. It's so hard. But I knew that other people needed to know and understand what victims go through, and they needed to see it for themselves. So I agreed. And for the next better part of that year, they were flying back and forth from New York and going to court with me. So it was, they were in the courtroom, they were grilled, they were asking me questions all the way to court, all the way back, which probably in some ways, while it was stressful for me, it also was a great distraction for me, because, you know, what the outcome of these cases were basically whether or not I was going to have to leave the state and become another person, or stay here and potentially be killed by him if he was released from prison.
Wow, it is intense. And like you, when we get the press involved, there's something that immediately changes because something else on the other side is suddenly tarnished. My case is nowhere near as intense, but for 9 years, there were 7 other victims that happened, and his victims got younger and younger and younger. And finally, he was soliciting 15-year-olds. And at that point, we had been safely hidden for 12 years. I had to raise the white flag and say, enough. Mm-hmm. And I went right to the press because the DA's office was a pass. He just went through every single loophole. No charges for sexual assault, sexual abuse, a registered sex offender, nothing until we went out with the press, and they covered it 4 different times, 4 different stories with the stalking, with all of these things, because his only words was, I'm trying to find my daughters. Creepo. Okay.
Yeah.
This is not okay. And finally at that point, and as we reviewed one more time, there was enough charges and enough pressure based on his latest victim that he finally was able to be put in state prison for at least 5 years. So we got 4 years left before the next round starts again. Yeah. So I understand. So Nicole, our Facebook user says, you know, like, whoa. It is unbelievable that you can't get the protection that you need, but your tenacity in reporting, keeping the documentation, and never quitting on this is huge. Mm-hmm. So everyone out there, please document. Make your plans and always look over your shoulder. because
a
you need
notebook,
to
keep
take
your notebook with
precautions.
you
Right.
everywhere you go.
Everywhere.
Notebook and pen, because people, we feel like we're going to remember details later. We can't. It's just when you're dealing with trauma and you're dealing with these events that are so stressful, you're not going to remember the details you need to remember. So I just got really good at, it's like, as soon as something happened, getting it down. Because otherwise and truly, April, that in court is what really made, I think, the biggest difference with the jury, because I was able to request from my attorneys my documentation on the stand. And I was able to read it because I had it, because I know there's a question about the time frame, because when we were at trial and I was testifying in front of the jury, which I guess it was like an hour and a half of testimony, it felt like it was 15 minutes, because it's so intense when it's happening. But I could not have remembered back 5-6 years before all those details. So having that written down, I was able to say, at this time, this happened. At this time, this call happened. So the jury was able to see, like, this is real. This happened. I had done all this documentation. I had called the police this many times, that it wasn't like I was just making all of this up. And I had the letters from the inmates at Jackson Prison. I had everything. I'm not the best at being organized. I'm not going to say that, but I had everything in a box, and then I had my notebook. So I still, now I have, I think, 4 boxes, but I know I can't get rid of it, because we don't know what's going to happen next.
Right. You don't know what's going to happen next. And so I hope this has empowered people to take the documentation, to put things down. And for anyone out there who might be a supporter, somebody who maybe you're a coworker, a friend, a family member that knows somebody who is in an abusive situation, please understand that your role there is to be a true supporter. And if you have that ability to support, please continue to do that, because it's not that, woohoo, she got away. Look at all of these years after. So being a supporter is somebody who really can be there for the full time. And there's different levels and amounts of it. And so, Nicole, I hope that you had those supporters, and I hope you continue to have those supporters as you continue to, keep things going. And, thank you again for sharing. And how, like, our Facebook user asks there, how are your children doing? How are things going?
And I know people were asking about their ages too. I was actually just looking for, in my book, I was going to show a quick picture. So when I left, my kids were 6 and 10 when I finally left the relationship. And now my oldest is 21 and my youngest is 17. And, they're doing well. They've been through a lot of trauma. So obviously we've, when I first left, they went to counseling. I'm a clinical social worker by trade also. And I think because I was very open and honest with them about what happened, and that it wasn't their fault, and that it wasn't my fault, and that, their dad, still loved them, even though, he just wasn't mentally well. They were able to do well, but they still have dealt with trauma. My oldest is now, I'm going to show you guys a quick picture. This is my son's high school oldest graduation. He just graduated from college, actually, where he goes to Delaware State. He plays football there. And he's going right back for one more year of football in grad school. And then my youngest is a junior in high school. Now, we still are worried about the future. People will often ask too, do you think he's still trying to hire people? Very possible, so we can never completely relax. We can never put our guard down 100%, because we don't know where his mindset is. And that's a terrifying thing. And right now, even though we did, I don't even know if it was sad, because we did get that conviction. He was, his earliest release date is 2030. So that's, 9 years away. And that time, as April, flies by, and you're, dealing with situations like this. It might seem like, oh, it's 9 years, but, you look up and you've got like 2 years left. So planning on what to do and where to be before he gets released is weighs heavily, I think, on all our minds.
Right. It does. And so planning for the future is something that is always in our present, and that's okay. But we can still enjoy the present. You have given us great strength and power to know that healing is possible, and strength to know that you didn't take it down. You might not have been the most organized person, but you didn't quit. You didn't
Right.
say, well, I can't do this, or I remember him telling me I was dumb, and so maybe I should just let this go. It's too hard. Something deep within you had the conviction to say, nope, my life is worth it, and we're going to continue, even though some of these decisions are hard. So I hope that empowers people this evening. And please share this out with your friends and family that might have these types of challenges, because Nicole was tenacious in making sure that she never stopped. Even though she had some challenges with the police and other things, she kept going and finding a way. So that is something that we need to take from today: is don't quit, keep going, even though it's hard. And that's why I mentioned the supporters. There's so many here. Ladies, you're not alone in this. Men, you're not alone in this. And the more we can get our communities together so that those that are making these bad decisions and bad choices in their life can appropriately pay for what they've done, so that life can be had, children can grow, and we can find the happiness in the moment today. Nicole, you have 2 minutes to share with the world some type of advice or whatever it is that you want to share. Ready? And begin.
Yeah. Okay, so I just, want to say, first of all, Finding Nicole has an entire guidebook. I just want to make sure people know that, about building resilience, finding yourself again after abuse. There's tips for not just victims, but also family members and friends, as well as therapists who are working with victims of domestic violence and their recovery. So I wanted to make sure people knew it wasn't just my story. It's also a guidebook. And it also explains some of the neurochemical changes that happen in abuse, so that we can try to understand that sometimes there's a physical reason people stay in these relationships. It's not always just emotional reasons. There's actually physical brain changes. I also want to mention that my nonprofit, the Enough Initiative, does have a retreat coming up in August, a resilience retreat. And we are heavily going to focus, it's from August 5th to the 8th, on rebuilding victims and survivors of domestic violence, helping them build coping strategies, financial management strategies, creating vision boards, finding themselves again and what they love, and building up that resilience so that they can feel like they can function in the world and not end up in another abusive relationship, which we see so often happen. People, when they don't get the help and counseling and therapy or skills that they need after leaving an abusive relationship, they very often end up in another one if they don't know the red flags. So red flags, knowing them is crucial for everyone. They're in my book. They're on our website, the enoughinitiative.com. So especially with students, that's our thing, getting into high schools, colleges, educating students on red flags. So talk to teenagers, talk to your teenagers, please tell them about these red flags and give them this information so they don't end up in a situation like mine, because I didn't know them.
Thank you so much. Great, wonderful advice. Everybody, we'll put down the links in the show notes for where you can get the book, get the guide, and understand what these red flags are. Tonight, thank you, Nicole, so much for your bravery and for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Welcome.
Talking.
You're welcome, everybody. And that's it for our Beacon of Light show tonight. We'll see everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.